Picture this. It's 1940. World War II has just kicked off, and for the Allied forces over in France, it is a complete and utter disaster. An entire army is on the brink of being destroyed. So that was the impossible question military leaders were facing, and the answer they came up with became one of the most incredible rescue missions in all of history. So let's dive in and see how it all went down. Okay, so you might be wondering, how on earth did this happen? How do hundreds of thousands of soldiers get stuck on a beach with nowhere to go? Well, it all started with a terrifying new kind of warfare unleashed by the German army. Yeah, blitzkrieg. It literally means lightning war. And that's exactly what it felt like, a sudden, powerful storm. It was a strategy that used incredibly fast-moving tanks and planes to just smash through enemy lines before they even knew what hit them. And this lightning war was frighteningly effective. It just sliced right through the Allied defenses, cutting off the British and French armies from the rest of their forces and just relentlessly pushing them towards the coast until they ran out of land. So here's the grim reality. The Allied armies were now squeezed into this tiny, shrinking bubble of land around the French port of Dunkirk. Their only way out was across the English Channel. If this rescue failed, the core of the British army would be either captured or destroyed. The war could have been lost right then and there. With everything looking so completely hopeless, a top-secret and extremely risky plan started to take shape. Honestly, it was their last and only chance. On May 26, 1940, they launched Operation Dynamo. And get this, the entire mission was planned from a secret command center hidden deep inside the famous White Cliffs of Dover. The commanders could literally look out across the water and see the disaster happening just a few miles away. Now, this is where you can see just how desperate things were. The initial goal of the plan was to save maybe 45,000 men, but the real number of soldiers trapped on that beach was over 300,000. It was like trying to empty an ocean with a bucket. The plan just seemed way too small for the problem. To even attempt this, they knew they couldn't just use military ships. No, they were going to need every single boat they could get their hands on, which led to one of the most amazing and strangest fleets ever put together. The Royal Navy was the backbone, for sure. Their huge destroyers could carry hundreds of soldiers at a time. But these big ships were also huge targets for German submarines and bombers. And in order to save the men, they had to leave all of the heavy equipment, tanks, trucks, big guns, behind on the beach. But they had another big problem. The water was too shallow near the beach for the giant destroyers. So an urgent call went out across Britain for anyone with a boat. And you know what? Ordinary people answered. Fishermen, businessmen, you name it. They sailed their own fishing boats, private yachts, and river ferries into a war zone. These little ships, sailed by volunteers, became the true heroes of Dunkirk, acting like little water taxis, shuttling soldiers from the sand out to the big warships. So while this rescue fleet was sailing to the rescue, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were just trying to survive on the beaches, waiting and hoping. And for them, it was an absolute living nightmare. I mean, just try to imagine it. You're exhausted, you're starving, and you are terrified. You're standing for days in a line that stretches for miles right out into the freezing cold sea. Your only shelter is a small hole you desperately dug in the sand, and all the while, you're being attacked from the sky. Those attacks from the air were from the Luftwaffe, which was the name for Germany's powerful air force. Their planes were constantly bombing and strafing the beaches and the ships, trying to stop this evacuation at any cost. Because the main harbor had been destroyed, they had to get creative. They started using these long, narrow stone and wood piers, called moles, as temporary docks. They weren't built for huge ships, but destroyers carefully pulled up alongside them, which allowed thousands of soldiers to just walk on board. It was a genius idea that sped things up a lot. And we have to remember that none of this would have been possible without the incredible sacrifice of French soldiers. They fought a heroic rearguard action, holding back the German army, basically forming a protective shield around Dunkirk that bought everyone else the precious time they needed to escape. So, with planes attacking from above, submarines in the water, and total chaos everywhere, how did this desperate plan actually turn out? Well, the result was something no one could have possibly predicted. Remember that initial goal of saving just 45,000 men? They didn't just meet that goal, they completely blew it out of the water. The actual number of soldiers they rescued was simply astonishing. 338,226. Let that sink in for a moment. That's how many Allied soldiers were saved. It was so far beyond anyone's wildest expectations that people immediately started calling it the miracle of Dunkirk. But this miracle came at a huge cost. They saved the soldiers, but they lost the equipment. Thousands of tanks, trucks, and massive artillery guns were all left behind on the beaches of France. It was a massive loss that would take years to replace. So let's be clear, Dunkirk was not a victory. It was a desperate retreat. But its impact on the war and on history itself was enormous, and it's remembered in a really powerful way even today. This evacuation created a famous idea known as the Dunkirk spirit. It came to mean pulling together and showing incredible courage when facing impossible odds. It's all about refusing to give up, even when things look hopeless. It's a phrase people still use today. So why did Dunkirk matter so much in the long run? Well, saving that army meant Britain could stay in the war. Without those soldiers, there would have been no one to defend against a potential invasion, and no experienced army to eventually go back to France on D-Day. Simply put, Dunkirk prevented a total Allied defeat right at the start of the war. And that really leaves us with one final, pretty sobering thought. What if it had failed? If those little ships hadn't made it, if that army had been lost back in 1940, how different would our world be today?